At the turn of the century, the video game industry was changing once again. 3D games became the norm. Platformers were quickly becoming a thing of the past, and the first-person shooter genre was just growing into its own. Many of Nintendo's famous franchises went along with this, changing their very natures to appeal to a brand new era of gamers. While this was going on, Fire Emblem tried to go at it from a different route. Instead of going along with the status quo, the series would innovate in its own way, keeping the same two-dimensional approach and continuing to support a dying console. Each entry would try to experiment in their own unique way. Genealogy of the Holy War added the weapon triangle, forever changing how you played Fire Emblem. Thracia 776 became well known for being the most brutal entry in the Fire Emblem franchise to this day, and the original Fire Emblem would create the tactical RPG genre that has become ever present in gaming to this day. All of this was possible due to the creative mind of Shozo Kaga. Having worked on the franchise for nearly a decade, many worlds and phenomenons were made by his hand. But with time comes apathy, and Kaga would soon leave the series to make his own unique work. With the visionary lost and the franchise on the decline in general, was there any way it could possibly be saved? Or would Shozo Kaga drag Fire Emblem down with him? After his departure from the Fire Emblem series, Shozo Kaga founded his own company, Turnanog, and with it created his latest masterpiece, the then titled Emblem Saga. It was his spiritual successor to the franchise, one with similar turn-based gameplay, graphical and musical tones, and even an interface that seemed a bit too similar to Fire Emblem. The story was also very similar to Kaga's previous work on Gaiden, following two protagonists with two different armies of their own that intersect at a few points during the game. It was a return to old-school Fire Emblem, a return that was too comparable to the original in the eyes of Nintendo. This was because Emblem Saga wasn't due for a release on a Nintendo console, but rather Sony's shiny PlayStation. Being a direct competitor and market rival to the Nintendo 64, Nintendo did not want a series to go against Fire Emblem and possibly succeed in the long run. Prior to its 2001 release, Nintendo put legal pressure on Turnanog, as they were unhappy that Kaga was making an extremely similar game with an extremely similar title, stating they felt that this was used deliberately for promotional purposes and would bring false recognition to users. Essentially, Nintendo was worried that gamers would think that this was the next Fire Emblem game. Not wanting to get into a legal battle, Kaga agreed to change the game's name to Tear Ring Saga, and removed any and all Fire Emblem references a month before release. But Nintendo still wouldn't have any of that, and in the end still sued Turnanog and its publisher Interbrain for copyright infringement to the tune of $2 million at the time. They then went through a legal battle that lasted for nearly 4 years, at first ending in a win for Kaga, but then into a loss, forcing the company to pay nearly $700,000 by the end of it. The legal issues seemed to ruin Kaga and his dream at a new franchise. After releasing a sequel to Tear Ring Saga in 2005 called Berwick Saga, the franchise and Kaga himself seems to have disappeared from the public eye for good. Unless his new project, which is currently slated for a 2016 release, Vestiria Saga, has anything to say about that. But even with Shozo Kaga out, Fire Emblem wasn't done yet. Oh no! It was on the rise from here. This rise was propelled by the series' entrance into the ever-popular Super Smash Bros. Franchise, a fighting series that pits Nintendo's greatest against each other. The iconic Marth had been considered a prime candidate ever since the original Smash. Masahiro Sakurai, the franchise's creator, sought to add him from the beginning of development of their new game, Super Smash Bros. Melee. In tandem with this, the team also added a clone character of Marth, Roy, the star of the recently cancelled Fire Emblem 64, and the star of the next project that was forthcoming. Their inclusion in the series would shake the foundations of the entire Fire Emblem franchise, but the aftershocks wouldn't be felt for years to come. Before we learned of what would come of that, the next entry in the series came around. Formed together by the recently cancelled Fire Emblem 64, it would take a new direction from the one that Kaga had led. First, they needed to find a new director to lead the franchise, and and they found him in Tohru Narihiro, a veteran programmer who had been with the franchise from the very beginning. With their leader settled on, the team decided to choose a new platform for their next venture. No longer would Fire Emblem be stuck in the past and stay on consoles that have long since lost their luster. Now, Fire Emblem's new home would be in the palm of your hand. The Game Boy Advance, releasing in 2002 as the newly titled Fire Emblem Fuin no Suguri, or as it's officially called, Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. This would be a return to the more simplistic storytelling of the originals. Following the exploits of the titular Roy, the game is set in a new and separate world from its predecessors, the continent of Elib, a land once wrecked by a fierce war between humans and dragons. 1,000 years after the conflict, the misanthropic King Zafil of the militarist nation of Bern has freed the infamous Demon Dragon and engaged the rest of Elib in a full-scale war with the intent of freeing the world from mankind and returning it to its rightful dragon owners. In response, Roy, the young heir of Fere, leads the forces of Lycia in combating Bern in lieu of his ill father, Marquez Eliwood. While proving to be a colorful adventure in more ways than one, The Binding Blade was a vastly different story than those created under Shozo Kaga's stead. His use of a relatively gray moral setting where everyone could be in the wrong was replaced with a clear-cut visage of good versus evil. Whether this was a step back or step forward was up to the players and ultimately the fans' opinions. Combat was also trimmed down considerably. While Thracia 776 had one of the greatest difficulty curves in all of Fire Emblem, in comparison, Binding Blade was a shadow of its former self. But it did do something right. Mostly a hidden mechanic until this entry, the support system was brought to center stage. Equivalent to the love system without the love, supports happen in a similar way when characters talk to each other on the battlefield. Each support grants certain bonuses to your units, and as they grow up in support rank, they can eventually get married like in genealogy, but without the children. This system allowed for a greater level of insight and depth into your army members of lesser importance, and made them all the more memorable, compared to prior installments where they were, by and large, left flat and unfleshed out. The flow of the battle also differed from previous entries. Certain stat changes and reworks were made, and an affinity system gave each unit one of 7 elemental affinities to dictate what support bonuses they would give to their partner. The weapon triangle was also tinkered with ever so slightly. Leaving the physical triangle alone, their focus was on the magical triangle, where they combined fire, thunder, and wind magic into anima magic, while keeping light and dark the same, creating the trinity of magic that was used for many years. Fire Emblem The Binding Blade was also the first in the series to include a rudimentary form of multiplayer where you could fight against another player's army. Incidentally, this feature had been one that Shozo Kaga had wanted to include from the very beginning. This and much more is why The Binding Blade is considered today to be the game which codified the general structure and gameplay flow of almost all subsequent Fire Emblem games. Many considered this to be the turning point in the down spiral, but no one can deny the influence this one game had on the future of the entire franchise, while bringing it back from the brink. If only the next entry could rectify its mistakes. But the world had plans for Fire Emblem, big ones. When Super Smash Bros. Melee was being localized in the West, their team was faced with deciding whether or not Marth and Roy should come with the game. No one in the West really knew about the franchise, and since they spoke Japanese, no one would even be able to understand them. But they saw no harm in the matter and let them stay in. This would unknowingly change the fate of Fire Emblem forever. Fans of Super Smash Bros. Flocked to these characters, wanting to know who they were and where they came from. The popularity of Marth and Roy was large enough that Nintendo felt it was high time to release the series globally. But Super Smash Bros. Wasn't the only reason. Another came with the long-forgotten title that started it all, Famicom Wars, now releasing as the brand new Advanced Wars globally. Nintendo was excited by this, and felt that strategy games truly had a place on their new handheld. A new Fire Emblem title was incoming, and the whole world was going to play it. Fire Emblem Reikanoken, or Fire Emblem Blazing Sword, releasing in 2003 and later that year as the aptly titled Fire Emblem. This time around, the story told would be a prequel of sorts to Binding Blade, set on the same continent of Elib 20 years prior to its predecessor's events. It stars 3 main characters, Eliwood and Hector, the fathers of the Binding Blades Roy and Lilina, and a completely new character, Lyn, The game is divided into two segments. The first segment stars Lyn and revolves around her quest to save her grandfather from his treacherous brother, acting as a tutorial mode for the game. The longer second part stars Eliwood, Hector, and Lyn, as they oppose the schemes of the sorcerer Nergal, who wishes to summon the long-banished dragons back to Alib. It was in many ways a marked improvement over Binding Blade's Tale, weaving a story that appealed to newcomers and series veterans alike. As Blazing Sword had the shortest development cycle in series history, much of its gameplay and assets in general were reused, but that doesn't mean they didn't try. The player was given a role in the story as a tactician. While you yourself don't participate in battle, you instead are the one that helps guide the armies of Lyn along with Eliwood and Hector to victory. Another little tidbit for the game was with the Japanese release. For the first time in series history, you were able to link Blazing Sword with Binding Blade, allowing for certain features to be unlocked in the new Fire Emblem. 2 epilogue scenes were unlocked from the second you beat the game, otherwise you would have to play through it 9 to 11 times. More important than either of these, however, was the ability to skip Lyn's story, basically a bona fide tutorial mode that you're forced to go through. It really had no bearing on the story at large and was certainly skippable. It was Nintendo's old philosophy rearing its ugly head again, believing that international gamers couldn't handle the difficulty at first. But players still plowed through to find an amazing story hidden underneath. And after selling nearly 1 million copies worldwide, the franchise was officially solidified globally. With that, it was time to innovate once again. This innovation came with their next entry, Fire Emblem Saima no Kosuki, or Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Releasing in 2004 and 2005 globally, this game is the only completely isolated title in the entire series, set in a completely separate world from all the others, Magvul. It stars Erika and Ephraim, twin heirs to the Kingdom of Renes, as they combat the sudden aggression of their southern neighbor, Grotto, and investigate the dark forces that have caused their former ally to swiftly turn on them and the rest of the continent and save the Sacred Stones from destruction. Sacred Stones was a return to Gaiden-like storytelling with separate characters working for their own goals until they meet in the end. This inspiration from the series past also influenced the gameplay. A branching class system was implemented. All units, save a few, could change their class into 2 different types, or instead become a trainee class, a stage even lower than normal units. In turn, they gain experience quickly, and after reaching level 10, they can become normal units during the next chapter. This basically allowed any unit to become a completely different class given some time, giving you further customizability than ever before. Monsters had a bigger presence within Sacred Stones. All of them had their own classes and reclasses just like your own units, but in general they usually had inferior stats to go along with that. Like Fire Emblem Gaiden, there was a world map that the player could manually traverse through. There were random skirmishes with monsters and towns aplenty for you to use at your leisure for shopping and extra experience. That too was completely changed. Every unit has an infinite amount of experience they can gain from, drastically decreasing the difficulty of the game. In fact, because of this and much more, Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones may just be the easiest Fire Emblem game ever made. Going from one of the hardest games ever created to a cakewalk in a sea of difficulty, the Fire Emblem series was in a precarious place. With this change in attitude, could they stand the test of time, or would they have to return to their roots once again? Hello dear viewer, and thank you for watching another episode of Chronicles. If you enjoyed hearing about the origins of Fire Emblem, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for something new every week. But who am I? Well, I'm Lockstin, the main voice of Chronicles of Gaming. And if you want to learn more about gaming with theories and reviews alike, then check out my channel here for more. So what's your favorite GBA Fire Emblem entry, and do you feel that they are inferior, superior, or just middle of the road to their predecessors? Chris and I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments down below, and don't forget to check out our website where you can read scripts for the latest episodes a week early. Anyway, that's it from us. Don't forget to stay awesome and continue that thirst for knowledge.